So recently I remembered being told this as a child, and I must share it. My grandmother is very elderly now. She suffers from dementia and struggles to remember anything in any detail. I'm very close to her and have visited her every week since I was a child. She would always tell me things about her past back when her memory was more intact. Her father was the only person she could confide in, and he passed shortly after she married in the 1960s. Shortly after he had died, she had a stretch where she would dream of him every night. He would be sat in his chair with his dog by his side. My grandmother would walk in and sit beside him. He would then tell her the same things every night. Firstly, he would take a calendar with 2 dates circled and show her them. He would then go on to tell her how he was waiting, but he didn't know what for, and that when someone dies, there are a series of tasks they must complete, and his was to help people cross over to the other side. She'd have the exact dream every night for around a week, and then never saw him again. A few months later, she got a call from her mother saying a close family friend and a good friend of her father's was dying, and he wanted to see her and her mother before he died. They got to the house and entered the bedroom, and he was not in a good way. His breathing was very weak, and he was grimacing in pain. There was a priest in the room along with his wife who was comforting him. Not long after they had entered, the atmosphere changed in the room. Suddenly, the dying man stopped grimacing and relaxed and reached out to hold his wife's hand. The temperature cooled in the room, and a general atmosphere of peace fell over the house. The man then passed away. Immediately, my grandmother felt that her father had done what he had described in the dream, and even his wife commented on a presence she felt when he passed. This may all seem like coincidence, however, this is where the calendar came in with the 2 dates underlined. The first date was the 1st of May. On the 1st of May 1986, my grandmother's mother died after frequently claiming someone was waiting for her on the other side. The second date was the 16th of August. On the 16th of August 1995, my grandmother's husband died. I accept this all seems far-fetched, but my grandmother never made things up, and I'll always remember her relaying this to me in great detail every time I told her I'd had a strange dream. I like to think her dad will help her cross over to the other side when her time comes, although I suspect he was waiting for his wife all that time, and he's helped enough people to cross over to the other side. Special shout out to Lonnie7557 for submitting this story called Nebraska. This took place in the early 1970s, Nebraska, in a little bitty town called Dorchester, not too far outside Lincoln. My mom, abandoned by her first husband, did her best to raise my 2 older brothers. My brothers were ages 4 and 7. Times were lean and hard for the little family. With some help from my grandparents, Mom moved into a shabby house located in town. The house had some history. It belonged to the railroad, serving as a boarding house for employees and passengers dating back to the 1880s. It fulfilled that role until it fell into disuse. It was eventually made into a rental property. Mom noticed strange happenings surrounding the family starting the day they moved in. Small rows of salt neatly poured on all windowsills and across all doorways. The family's pet St. Bernard named Barney refused to enter the house. He stayed outside regardless of the weather or the time of year. To make matters worse, both my brothers uncharacteristically started wetting their beds. One morning, my brother, age 4, played in the living room, yet he watched a specific section of the wall. Mom noticed he sometimes talked to a particular part of the wall. Mom was cleaning house at that time, so she had one eye on him and the other on washing dishes. Figuring he was using his imagination, shrugging off his behavior. Soon she started vacuuming the living room. My brother sat watching Sesame Street on the television. As she swept, she noticed my brother stand up and walk over to the wall he had talked to earlier. He then put both hands on the wall, slowly moving them up and down. He continued talking to the area, then broke into tears. Mom shut off the vacuum and asked what was wrong. She said my brother turned and faced her, his face flushed and wet. Through his tears, he sobbed, "Mommy, there's a sad man in the wall. He's crying and he wants out. He is there, Mommy. See him? Can you see him? Help him, Mommy. Please help him." Mom quickly snatched up one brother and half-dragged the other. She ran the 3 blocks, terrified, to my grandparents' house. My grandparents finally talked Mom into returning to the home a few days later. A feat that took much convincing, threatening, and reassuring. In the months after that event, a loud crashing bang sound often emitted from the attic. Mom described the sound as an adult taking a bowling ball and slamming it on the ground as hard as possible. A rolling sound soon followed the loud impact. Every time the sound occurred, it was investigated. Nothing was ever found. This happened both day and night. My grandparents both experienced this on many occasions. When the sound would happen, my grandparents said both my brothers would scream and go into hysterics. Mom felt terrified and trapped. She was bound into a lease and borrowed heavily from my grandparents to make ends meet. She had nowhere to go with 2 small children and couldn't afford to leave. Months later, my dad came into the picture. He eventually moved into the household. It was a damn creepy house, he said on many occasions. He hated living there the minute he moved in. Dad had returned from Vietnam a few years prior and was a combat veteran. Whenever he was in that house, a feeling of being watched with ill intent plagued him. Many nights for him were filled with terrible nightmares about the war. He had never experienced this before moving into the home. Mom said she would often wake up to find him pacing restlessly in the darkness. Other nights she was awoken by the muffled screams of his tormented sleep. One Sunday evening the family returned home from grocery shopping. Upon unlocking the front door and entering the home, they found 4 dead blackbirds in the center of the living room. The birds lined up in a parallel row with their wings spread as if in flight. They each lay on their breasts. Heads and beaks were pointing toward a specific area of the living room wall. Instantly, the atmosphere was pierced by my brother's sharp, shrill, screaming cries. My father stood in the entryway. His arms were full of groceries, his mouth gaped open in utter shock by the insanity before him. My mom immediately turned and crouched to console the boys and shield them from the scene. It happened as she kissed and praised her boys, a loud bashing sound hammered from the attic above. The windows of the house vibrated from the concussion. Dust slowly drifted down through the last rays of sunlight. Mom said the utter silence that followed was incredibly unnerving. Then the slow, heavy rolling sound again filled the entire house. My dad set down the bags of groceries and made his way to the attic, cautiously approaching. Mom continued to hug my brothers. She happened to look past their shoulders onto the large front porch. She saw Barney there. The giant St. Bernard lay cowered with his tail tightly pulled under him. The dog was unwilling to make eye contact when she called out to him. Instead, the animal shook uncontrollably. She noticed a large wet spot beneath him. Dad came down from the attic a few minutes later. Nothing was ever found, as usual. This was the breaking point for my family. My dad decided to sell his vehicle and worked overtime when possible. He paid off the lease at the first opportunity. He moved them all out of the house. They never looked back. My dad said that once they left that house, they never had any other experiences like that. His terrible nightmares stopped. I traveled to Nebraska with my dad in 2002, and he showed me the old house, which was abandoned but still standing. Dad grimly joked, saying as we drove by, "I wonder if that crying man ever made it out of that wall." I'll preface this by saying I've had paranormal experiences my whole life, as has my brother, Dad, and his mom. My grandparents bought land back in the mid-60s and built their house there, one of the first houses on this country road, and one of the first 100 in the area. At the turn of the century, the area was a large deer hunting lodge. I've never fully felt comfy in my grandparents' house. I was always afraid to walk down the hallway to the bedrooms, and as far as I can remember, have only ever done it with the lights on. I never felt comfy in the boys' room after dark. When I was little and stayed with them, I could only sleep in the girls' room with the nightstand light on, the doors open, and the bathroom light on in the hallway. In '08, when the market crashed, we had to move in with them for a year. My parents took the girls' room, and my brother and I took the boys' room. My brother slept on the bed, and I slept on the trundle. When my brother was home for the night, I slept just fine. When he was gone, I would have to sleep with the cabinet lighting on. I've always preferred a dark room and typically cannot sleep with lights on, but at their house, I cannot do the dark. So my brother moved out before the rest of us. I decided to move to the main bed as it was more comfy. One night I finally say I'm just being a baby with a light. I'm going to turn it off tonight, and I bet I'm perfectly fine. Yeah, that was a mistake. I turn the lights off, hunker down, and fall asleep. At one point, I feel like I wake up, and there is someone in the room with me. I'm laying flat on my back. I turn my head, and this little boy, maybe 8-ish, is sitting on the chair across the room. He's wearing knickers and what I would describe as 1920s to 30s clothing. We start talking kind of like you would encountering a child alone at the park. "Hello there, what's your name? What are you doing here?" It's pretty innocent. The boy's demeanor changes. He asks why I killed him. I'm shocked and say I didn't kill you. He insists, I insist. Then he stands up and starts slowly walking toward me, telling me I was his nanny and I drowned him and hid his body. This happens while he slowly crosses the 4 feet to the bed. I'm still laying there flat on my back, scared silly at how insistent he is, how malicious he seems, and him coming close to me. Then he climbs on the bed, straddles my body, leans in close to my face and says, "You deserve this for killing me." He wraps his hands around my throat and starts strangling me while telling me over and over that I killed him. About this point, my brain said that I'm not awake, I'm still asleep, I need to open my eyes. Then I'm screaming in my head, "Open your eyes!" It was super hard. I could not get my eyes to open. I'm struggling for breath from being strangled while being told I killed this boy. It clicks in my brain that if I could not open my eyes, I needed to wake myself another way and start trying to move any part of my body. I feel like I'm laying still, but also rocking side to side, trying to make my voice work, anything. The rocking finally worked and my eyes open for real. I sit bolt upright in bed, reach up and flick the lights on. I'm sitting on the bed, hyperventilating, freaking out. Once I calm down enough to lay back down, I try closing my eyes and I can see the boy sitting back in the chair, just smiling the most sinister smile at me. I ended up staying awake the rest of the night. When I finally got up to go to the bathroom, I had a faint red mark around my throat. I never slept with the lights off again and moved out as quickly as I could afford. My dad, who grew up in that house, has night terrors. He says a demon is trying to get him, that he wakes up and they come at him while he's laying in bed. My entire life I've been woken in the middle of the night to my dad screaming. My mom tells how he starts rocking side to side or flinging his arms out, then sits bolt upright screaming. I now know exactly what he means. I understand the rolling side to side and the trying to scream yourself awake. I've never experienced anything in my life as scary as that little boy. Even having my own child disappear at the park and frantically trying to find him for 20 minutes was not as scary as that little boy. Since moving out, I have not been back to that house, nor slept in it. I've never experienced anything remotely close to this before or since. This only just happened last night, and I've never experienced this before, but many weird experiences at home can be explained by it. As I was about to go to sleep last night around 3 a.m., I heard my door open and someone walk in. Naturally, I began panicking, thinking that someone has broken into my house. I was turned away from the door and didn't want to move in case it was. Then suddenly I feel the weight of someone crawl over, only light, as if it was a kid. Then they lay down next to me on my bed, holding my finger. Obviously, I'm extremely confused and am preparing to throw my blankets over them and bolt out of my room. But when I open my eyes, the weight of them on the bed disappears and the feeling of them holding my finger slowly fades away. Other experiences I've had in the past, such as a girl's voice saying hello and light breathing outside my window, I've just brushed off as my imagination or sleep deprivation. But this was different. I was awake the whole time. I talked to my mom about this, and she told me that when she was pregnant with my younger brother about 15 years ago, she used to feel someone bump into the end of her bed and stare at her. Initially, she thought it was just my older brother or I who used to come into her room at night if we needed something. But when she would open her eyes, she wouldn't see anything. However, one day, she felt the bump on her bed and someone looking at her, but this time it was at the side of the bed next to her. When she opened her eyes, it was a little blonde girl in a nightie. My mom remembers following her out of the bedroom and into the hallway and her disappearing around the corner. This girl was never aggressive and just seemed to want my mom to follow her and give her attention. And now I'm wondering if it's the same girl coming to my room now and just wanting my attention or some sort of love. Hence why she laid down next to me and held my finger.